And hi, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to another month of Crystal Q&A with me. I'm really happy that you're here. I'm just getting the YouTube recording up and going so that anybody who is joining us through YouTube is able to do so. So welcome back. I have been really looking forward to taking a look at some of the other questions that have been coming in during this month. And if you are new to my work, I'm Maryjo. I'm the owner of Fourth Dimension Healing in Stillwater, Minnesota, and I have an energy and crystal healing practice. And I am also the director of the Center for Crystal and Healing Studies, which is my online school. And through this school, I offer a wide variety of courses that are self-paced. They're blended, which means some of the content you work through at your own pace, according to your own schedule. There are pause points also within the courses where you and I connect for mentoring, whether that takes place in person or virtually. So at the end of this Q&A today for the next hour, we'll talk rocks. And then at the end, I will speak again a little bit about how you can reach out to me and also connect with some of the links that I have available. Particularly, they will be posted on my YouTube channel once this current video is set up to be able to be replayed. So if you're new to this whole process and haven't had a chance to see any of my other Q&A replays, essentially what happens is people send me questions throughout the month around crystal healing and how to work with stones, because people are really curious about that. Crystal healing and working with gemstones and crystals for healing purposes goes back millennia. And so while it may be a sense of relatively new and perhaps sometimes falls into what sometimes people refer to as like New Age healing, it's actually a very old practice, and we're remembering and reconnecting with some of those traditions. The first question that actually I'm going to address is one that I simply ran out of time last month. And so it is a carryover from last month. I have reached out to the person who submitted this question, so they've already had a chance to get their question answered, but it's a really important one. And so I'm going to go ahead and start off with that. I work with someone who is having some health problems. They know I'm thinking about them, and I would like to give them a stone to help them heal. How do I choose the right one? Well, you know, this is a great question, because what comes up easily and often for us when we are thinking about healing is we think about, oh, what's the problem? How am I going to fix the problem? And actually, crystal healing and energy healing, for that matter as well, really, it's not about fixing problems. It's more about supporting the healing process. And so even though this person doesn't know particularly what those health challenges are, nor do I really gave some thought to a particular stone that I think could be really helpful. And I'm going to talk a little bit about it. I work from a system of 5 different elements: earth, fire, water, wind, and storm. And all of those energies and those, the manifestation of those elements are found within our body. In this situation where we're working with healing, we know that anytime a need for healing arises, we know that it's impacting the physical body somehow. It could be a physical issue. It could also be an emotional or mental issue, but that does impact physical health. And so I always like to think about a stone to suggest for this kind of a situation that does have some earth element properties to it, because that's going to address the earth and the physicality that's within our actual body. I also, though, believe that in this particular case, the sense of healing could also really be supported by the element of water, because water is about, it's about emotion, it's about releasing, and it's about going with the flow, literally. And we all can imagine what it's like to be pushing against a current. Perhaps you've at some point been in a canoe or in a raft or in a boat where you've moved against the current, and it's more difficult than when going with the flow and with the current. So by combining these two particular elements of earth and water, the stone that I would really recommend at this point is called eudialyte. Now, eudialyte is really a complex stone. It's made out of complex properties. It has complex energy frequencies that really move through this stone. And yet, because of that, it can really touch into a lot of different layers and aspects of healing at a physical, emotional, and mental level. It has, I would say, an energy that touches into the multidimensional healing that takes place within ourselves. And there's a lot about healing that we don't understand, and that's okay. Eudialyte would be a wonderful stone to support a person by bringing in this gentle earth energy that allows them to be present in their body while they're doing their healing, and also really nurtures the emotional body and the heart chakra. When we can be at peace, when we can feel kindness and a sense of compassion for ourselves, we heal better. We're able to restore our physical body, our nervous system calms down, we heal, and we restore ourselves much more easily. So eudialyte is a stone that I would recommend. And sometimes people say, you know, gee, you like all these stones. You know, you always say you have a favorite stone. Well, there are some stones that I really, really like to work with, and I'll tell you that eudialyte is one of them. So that is the information I can offer for that question. And if you're curious about it, go ahead and explore it. I have an online shop that you can just go out there and learn about stones. You have stones at home that you may or may not know all of their properties. Go ahead and explore what I have to say about them, and then connect up with those stones personally so that you are able to learn what you learn and glean from the stones that you work with as well. Here's a question that came in over the past month. The question is, I've been working with your 5-piece crystal toolkit set of gemstones for a while now, and I'm feeling like I'm ready for something else. What other stones make sense to work with next? Now, if you're not familiar with my crystal toolkit sets, I have 3 different sets. One is a 5-piece set, one is a 10-piece set, and one is a 15-piece set. And you can learn more about those later by going out to my website. But I just want to tell you, if you're not familiar with what this particular set includes, this person who's writing this question has been working with shungite, that resonates with earth, carnelian, fire, rose quartz, water, amethyst, wind, and clear quartz. That's that kind of stormy element. So keeping that in mind and knowing that I work with the system that really connects the gemstones and crystals with the elemental properties and energies that are part of us, I have selected 5 more stones for this person to begin to think about how they could work with them. And I'm going to go in order again. I'm going to go earth, fire, water, wind, and storm. So for the earth element gemstone, my recommendation would be to work with some petrified wood. Now, I do a lot of videos, and I've been doing these monthly for a while now, and I'm not recalling off the top of my head if I spend a great deal of time talking about petrified wood. I love petrified wood. If we think about petrified wood, it was a tree. It was an organic substance that stood still long enough, allowed transformation to take place, and transformed into something really entirely solid and completely different. And so as we're doing healing work, particularly when we're pulling in that earth energy, petrified wood invites us to slow down and stop, stand still, and let the transformation take place. And yet it is this organic material that has been transformed and shifted over time. So that would be the earth element stone that I think could be really a fabulous stone to begin to work with. Next is fire. And fire has a wide range of ways that it shows up in various gemstones. This is a piece of Apache tear, which is lava. It is a form of obsidian, and I love this version of it. It's raw. You can often find them polished as well. Obsidian is volcanic glass, and so it represents this fierce fire, literally fire energy, and yet it also has cooled down a bit and has been able to transform itself. Apache tear, as I mentioned, is a form of obsidian or lava, is really not a gemstone per se. It's considered a mineraloid, and basically it just cooled really fast. So it hasn't had a chance over the eons and over much time to be able to develop a molecular structure that repeats itself, which is the definition of a crystal. So this would be my suggestion to work with for fire element. Here's my water element recommendation. And that is aquamarine, and it is sometimes a little difficult to catch an example of this. So you'll have to explore images online to learn more about what this beautiful stone supports. It is a wonderful stone to support communication. Water is about flow, it's about emotions, and it's also about expression. And so as this person has been working with rose quartz, which has been very nurturing and supportive, especially for themselves, now they're able to shift and move into a way of expressing and allowing their healing to move forward. Sometimes it can be as simple as learning to speak a little bit more clearly and comfortably. And sometimes it's how do we express ourselves through maybe poetry or dance or music in new ways. So this would be my recommendation, is a piece of aquamarine. For the wind element, and I mentioned briefly last month when we were doing a bit of a meditation around how to work with gemstones and crystals, that I actually was working with a little bit of a sphere of charoite. So I wanted to show you charoite. This is a beautiful stone, comes out of Russia. It's just this lovely stone that, while it resonates with wind, it really supports the heart chakra. And as I mentioned last month, in my experience, it has this way of enveloping the energy field and bringing balance to all of the chakras. So this is just a beautiful, beautiful stone to work with. And that would definitely be on my list for this person if they're really ready to move on to the next level, so to speak. And then for the storm element, storm is transformation. It is about not getting rocked and rolled around. It's about being in the eye, in the center of that storm, where you're very still. You see everything that's going on, yet you're not impacted and thrown around by it. So we don't get to storm easily, and we don't get to storm if we haven't got all of our other elements dynamically balanced. So that's why my approach is to work with the elements. And if we're needing more earth, then we're going to bring in more stones that resonate with earth. If we're getting a sense we need a balance of wind, we can bring in more of that too. So ultimately, we are able to land in a place of transformation. And blue kyanite is a stone that is wonderful for the throat chakra, but particularly for the brow chakra and the crown chakra. It brings in a clarity and not only a clarity, but a clearing away of clutter. So you can have this, how could I describe it? It's like the insight drops in because the storm has cleared away all of the debris that's interfering. This is a wonderful stone to work with for meditation. And so as we are moving up from the base of our body up through the top, we've moved through the earth and the fire and the water and the wind and the storm. That storm works with that entire column of chakra energy centers opened and balanced. And that allows the energy field itself to be in a state of balanced expansiveness. Not too big, but to the point where we can work with it and still hold energetic boundaries that are healthy for us and for others. So I hope that that answers that question. And as always, feel free to reach out to me. Send me a chat through my webpage. Go ahead and drop an email to me. Go ahead and give me a call if you've got questions. I'd be more than happy to help sort that out for you. So now this next question it's fascinating because it asks a question that helps us begin to shift our thinking about how to work with gemstones and crystals and draws in another healing tradition. So this particular question says, "Hi, Mary Jo. I've heard you talk about using crystals with the organs in the body. Sounds intriguing. Can you give an example?" So one of the things that I work with in my healing practice, and so if you were to visit me, either virtually or in person, you would be working very much with this system of working with organ body clock system. Now, the organ body clock is a healing concept that comes out of traditional Chinese medicine. What the Chinese medicine tradition holds is that there is a 24-hour clock that starts at 3 a.m. and every 2 hours there is a section of 2 hours that is assigned a particular body function area that is at its peak, and then 12 hours later it will be at its resting point. And so starting at 3 a.m., for example, 3 a.m. to 5 a.m. is the lung time. And the fascinating thing even about that particular structure and that particular model is that when we think about when we're born, the first thing we do is breathe, right? And so that's how they start that organ body clock system. And so slowly we move around into each of these 2-hour chunks of time. So what this particular system does, though, is broadens the understanding of what that body organ function is about. In our Western model of allopathic medicine, we tend to think more physically, and the traditional Chinese medicine philosophy incorporates energetics as well. I've actually brought a couple of examples of organ body clock gemstones that work with particular organ areas. The first one I want to talk about is the kidney layout. And so I'm going to show you a picture, hopefully no glare, but this is an example of where these particular gemstones would be placed when we're working with the kidney layout. So in the traditional Chinese medicine system, kidneys are an area that holds vital life force energy. It's known as Jing. And we have two types of Jing, that's spelled J-I-N-G. One type of Jing is called ancestral Jing. We're born with a certain amount of it. We cannot replace it. And when it eventually is depleted, then our life is done and complete. And that's one aspect of Jing. The other aspect of Jing is Jing, or life force energy, that we can gain and replenish through lifestyle, through the foods we eat. So for example, kidney beans are really restorative for Jing. Almonds are Jing. Quinoa is very helpful. Mangoes can be really helpful for supporting that replenishing of Jing. And there's a whole new way of, or another way of looking at health and vitality, which I'm not going to get into now, but it gives you an idea of it's this non-ancestral Jing that we're working with when we bring stones into the healing process. There are a number of different gemstones and crystals that can be used for the kidney layout. In fact, when my clients come to see me, then they are able to take a look at this card that gives them more information. And so I'm just going to read right off the back of the card that for the kidney layout, hematite, red jasper, snowflake obsidian, selenite, tiger iron, and golden red or blue tiger's eye are all stones that can be really helpful. So for this particular layout, I like to work with 2 hematites, iron ore, and a piece of golden tiger's eye. So if you were visiting me for a healing session, this was the layout that would be helpful for you. This would be laid on your abdomen, pretty much in line with where the kidneys are. And the kidneys are tucked around in back, just below the rib cage. So that's an example of the kidney layout. So while we think of kidneys storing, purifying blood, and whatever is not needed and is no longer useful gets turned into urine and moves into the bladder, from a traditional Chinese perspective, we are replenishing Jing, which is about vital life force energy and reconnecting and re-energizing the energy field. Now, another example of organ body clock system that I brought, again, to show you how some of this is similar and some of it's quite different, is the bladder layout. Here's an example of the bladder layout. And you can see that the stones are placed low down above the pubic bone in that lower abdominal space, kind of by the second chakra. So when we think about bladder function from a physical perspective, we just understand that that is how urine is eliminated and through the body because it's no longer needed. But when we shift to the Chinese medicine philosophy, where we understand that the kidneys are storing life force energy, it is the bladder through this work that distributes that life force energy wherever it needs to be. Now, there are a number of stones that can work with this particular layout as well. Lapis lazuli, blue apatite, sodalite, dumortierite, and blue and green kyanite. So I just actually finished talking about blue kyanite as the storm element stone that I would work with and recommend for this person who's ready to dive a little deeper into working with stones. In this particular layout, what I use, if you were at my office seeing me, I would be using a piece of sodalite. And I would be placing 3 blades. I'll show you what these look like. 3 blades of kyanite, blue kyanite. One would be directly above the sodalite that's placed right at your midline in that lower abdominal area. And 2 blades would be placed side by side again, having the layout look very much like this. So if you're curious about some of the other organ function areas, what their purposes are, how they work to support healing, go out to my online shop. I have a whole collection of and set for all of these different gemstone groupings that can be really helpful. So that is an example of how we can support body organs and stretch it out just a little bit. Just checking the chat, that looks good. So here's a great question, and it's about grids. And that may be something that you know a lot about, and it may be something that you're new to. So let's take a look at this question and then explore this a little bit further. I've heard you talk about grids, and honestly, it all seems very confusing to me. Some of the pictures I've seen of crystal grids online seem really complicated. What exactly is a grid, and why would a person use a grid? And can you give an example of how to create a really simple grid so it's not too overwhelming? Well, the first thing I think of is, I think I've seen some of those pictures online, because some of those crystal grids are very, very, very complicated. And if you've been following me at all or worked with me, you know that I say less is more. So I think it would be really helpful for us to talk a little bit about 3 aspects of grid work. It has to do with the geometry. It has to do with stone selection, and it has to do with an intention. So geometry, particularly what's known as sacred geometry, which is a term given to all of these naturally occurring patterns that we find in nature. So geometry for the grid is where I would say we want to start. There are a wide variety of grids available. I have some collection that you can download from my online shop. I have a couple of YouTube or video options available if you are interested in looking further at how to work with grids. One of them is actually right here on my YouTube channel. And then the other one is a free mini course I offer through my online school. So once I post this video out onto YouTube and make it public, I will have links to those 2 video options available, so you can always go out and find that easily. So there are grid shapes, geometry shapes that are square, there's circles, there's spirals, there are triangles, there are hexagons. I mean, it can be very complex, like the person who wrote this question, and some of them are just really overwhelming. I thought it would be really helpful for us to just talk about the basic square grid. And the beauty of grids is that you can actually have a template like this to work with. And honestly, that can be really helpful at the beginning. And you can also give yourself some flexibility and freedom to be able to let go of the paper and the printing and simply allow yourself to create a grid without the geometry. So I like the square grid. It's an easy one to access. We're very familiar with a square grid because we have squares all around us. We might have a kitchen table that's square. We maybe have a board game that's square. So this is not a very strange or uncomfortable or unfamiliar shape. This is a very solid shape. It is one that can be really stabilizing. And if you think about the fact that if this was a table and it had 4 legs and we take a leg out, there's a lot of wobbling before it gets reestablished. So when I see a square grid, it reminds me of being stabilized. So if we were to create a very simple grid, and we're going to do that right now, I would say start with a square, because that is going to be easiest for you. We are going to need to have some stones to select. And it may be that you have stones that you've collected on the beach or out on a walk in nature. And again, we want to make sure we have permission to take rocks home with us. If you're in a national or a state park or even a county park, I would say appreciate the stones, take photos of the stones, but please leave them there. They're not our property, but it could be that within the space that you would call your home, that would be more appropriate. So you're going to want to have some stones, and it could be an ordinary stone. It could be a collection of stones that you've been working with. And you're going to want one in the center, your center stone, kind of a focal point. And then these black dots simply indicate where you're going to put stones on the edges. These extra little arrows are simply optional indicators where you can place other stones if you want to. But again, less is more. And so for this grid that we're going to actually build right now together, I'm going to use one center stone, and then we're going to use 4 stabilizing stones in the corners. So for the center stone, I am sensing that I'd like to use a piece of natural citrine. So this is a form of quartz, and this actually resonates with fire. So it's going to be bringing in kind of a motivating and activating and awakening kind of energy. And whether we're creating this grid because we feel real sluggish, or we're trying to get organized, or we're feeling really scattered, this kind of active energy can be really helpful. So we're going to set that right in the center. And so you'll notice that I picked the geometry. I've got the stones that I'm going to work with. And the intention is to kind of stabilize and get kind of reoriented and activated. Get a little bit more motivation, but in a grounding way, not one that we're running in 8 different directions. Hematite is one of my go-to stones for anchoring. It's iron ore. Doesn't get much heavier than hematite. We're going to place one on each corner. So I want to pull this so you can see it just a little bit better. There we go. Just going to move this little dish out of the way. So as I've been placing each of these stones, I've been intentionally setting them with the focus of building that stability. So now we've got this grid, and we're not done yet, because one of the things we need to do is connect the energies of these stones together. Actually, if left alone, these stones are going to be able to figure out how to bring their energies together just fine on their own. But because we're part of the creation of this grid with the stones, it's important that we go through those steps. So it's called activating a grid, and you can do it with a fancy crystal. You can do it with a stick. I like to use my fingers a lot. You can even simply use your eyes. But what we're going to be doing is we're actually connecting the stones together energetically. Sometimes it can be helpful to activate the grid in the same manner as you laid the stones. Sometimes you'll get done creating your grid and you're going to say, oops, I don't remember exactly which order I placed those stones, and that's okay. So bottom line, what we want to do is we want to connect the center stone's energy with each of those 4 corner energies. And so with my finger, with the intention that that's what I'm doing, I can either actually touch or I can just be above. So that's where, as you're creating grids, if you want to do this, I would say do it in different ways and find out what works for you and what you prefer. So my preference is to touch, come back to the center and touch the next one, come back to the center and touch the next one, come back to the center and touch the next one. So now what we've done is we've created this grid. We've got our geometry, we've had our stone selection, we set the intention, and we've activated the grid. This grid can be very, very helpful. You can place it perhaps someplace in your home. It could be somewhere in your office. It could be sitting maybe right next to your computer if you work remotely. There's all kinds of places that you can place these grids. And so for this particular person who wrote this question, they really wanted to kind of rein it in and not get so complicated. And so this is what I would offer. There are advanced grids. I'll definitely say that there are. And in my Crystal Healer certification program, one of the courses included in that program is Advanced Crystal Healing. And at that point, if you were to ever take that program, that course, you would be learning about how to create a number of fairly complex grids. But we start at the basics because less is more, okay? Now, at some point, you may want to take the grid apart, and if so, you can just honor the work that the stones have offered for you, honor the geometries itself. Sometimes it could be helpful to go back and revisit the grid every day or two if you want to reactivate it. If it does get bumped, whether you have a cat that kind of walks through it or kids bump it, then simply rearrange those stones, reactivate it, and you are good to go. So I hope that that was a less complicated and less intimidating conversation around how to work with crystal grids, because they really are fascinating. And they represent, again, the naturally occurring patterns that we find in nature. And so it's just really a whole amazing area of study. So here is a question. I love the idea of working with elements along with crystals. Please talk more about storm. Well, I touched on storm already, didn't I? I talked about it with the blue kyanite. And storm is not something we want to rush into, and we can't force storm to take place. Storm happens, as I mentioned before, when all of the other elements are dynamically balanced. So if we're feeling really pretty good with mental clarity, our emotions are really balanced, we feel fairly active, we have good motivation, and we have a backache that's killing us, we have plantar fasciitis, we have a bad cold, we're not going to experience storm because, again, that earth element, that physicality is really landing in our physical body, needs healing, and when that balance occurs, that's when storm happens. However, if you want to explore what storm is like, I would say work with storm element stones. Last month, if you haven't seen the video, I would encourage you to go back and take a look at it because there was a guided meditation around how to work with the stones. And that would be really helpful for you when you're working with the storm element stones. I also have another video about storm element stones as well. So there are a couple options out there, even just here on my YouTube channel. So 3 stones that I'd like to talk about can be really helpful. This is a piece of what's known as red-capped amethyst. A little hard to get that focus, my apologies. You can always take a look again out online. I've got a number of varieties on my shop that you can see more closely. So red-capped amethyst has amethyst, and it has a fair amount of hematite. Hematite is this kind of silver look, but often will cause stones to turn red. Like last week or last month, I believe we talked about jaspers, and it's the hematite within the jasper, the red jasper, that makes that red color. So I like red-capped amethyst because it is a stone that is able to clear all of the chakras. When I'm working with it, I often will point it so that the reddish termination is facing down in alignment with the earth element, and the less terminated, more amethyst, and is up at the top, that aligns with that particular brow and crown chakra orientation. This makes a great wand. If you want to use this, for example, with activating a grid, you could certainly do that, just as I did with my finger to activate a wand. Sometimes, because it's terminated, you may find if you're holding it that you want to hold it so that the termination is pointing towards your body, drawing in this storm energy. And sometimes you may find you want to hold it with the termination pointing away to help clear. If you're right hand dominant, you're going to tend to receive energy on your left side. If you're left hand dominant, you're more likely to receive energy inflowing through your right hand. And so again, work with that. So red-capped amethyst is a really important stone to work with, especially now when we're going through so much transformation on our planet and within our human collective as well. Another storm element stone is a particular form of calcite. Now, calcite is very clearing. This particular variety is called zebra calcite. And one of the things I'm most fascinated about with zebra calcite is the layering. And the layering is so representative of the kind of layers that we move through as we're doing our healing work. And again, look at, here's another example of a naturally occurring wand that could be worked with creating a crystal grid and activating a crystal grid. There are a number of different varieties of calcite. This is going to be stormy, and yet there's a hint of earth that runs through it that can be really powerful. And the third stone I brought that has to do with storm element is called chiastolite. It's also known as cross stone because often you will find that the way the minerals align and the crystalline structure aligns, that it forms a cross. Now, you may not have a piece of chiastolite that actually has a visible cross. It's still chiastolite at a structural level, microscopically. All of those patterns are there. So some people like to work with a piece that has a more visible cross. Doesn't matter. I work with a piece that typically does not have a visible cross. It's a very powerful storm element stone. It really, if I had to have a word that I would say would kind of be a keynote around chiastolite, it is about convergence. It's about pulling these various experiences and healing and aspects of our life together. And again, as storm stands in the center in a place of calm. So when we look at the center of the cross on the chiastolite, we can imagine that right where all that crossing of those patterns meet is that still point that represents the storm activity. So that would be my recommendation for that particular question. Now I have another question, and it kind of actually picks up on one of them that we've already addressed. Hello, Maryjo. I'm designing a healing garden at my home, and I'm wondering the best way to include gemstones along with the flowers. My original plan was to include a labyrinth, but after listening to you talk about grids, perhaps I should have one of those in the space instead, or can I have both? Great question. So there are all kinds of ways that we can work with gridding and bringing in the geometries that the stones can support within any space, whether it is a tabletop whether it is creating a grid right next to the computer because you are a virtual worker and you want to be able to really represent some solid geometry and healing that takes place while you're working. There are all kinds of ways of doing it. Before I go too far into how we could take a look at the grid possibilities, I wanted to show you what a labyrinth is, because not everybody necessarily knows what a labyrinth is. So this is a labyrinth, and at first glance, it looks like it's a maze, but it's not. There is one way in and there is one way out. Now, labyrinths have been found in a variety of different continents, in all kinds of different places, from caves that are tucked away and this pattern has been drawn on the inside of the cave walls, to the floors of some of the cathedrals, like the Chartres Cathedral in France. It has a beautiful labyrinth that is actually part of the floor. The beauty of the labyrinth is that it's at least, I mean, they've been finding 5,000 years or more, this pattern has been used. I love it because it represents life. It represents a healing journey, a spiritual journey, a journey of any form, because we walk in, let me see how I can do this. We walk in and we follow back and forth until we get to the center, and then we work our way back out. And the beauty of the labyrinth is that you may be passing somebody who is on the path right next to you, and it's not clear to you if they're on their way in or on their way out. It's a great reminder that all of us are on the path. We have companions on the path, and it's a beautiful way to bring in that blending of spiritual healing along with stonework and intentionality. So I wanted to show you what the labyrinth looks like, and you can most definitely grid with a labyrinth. It could be that you work with the labyrinth as your template, and it is up to you and your creative inspiration and ideas and insights as to where you're going to place stones within the labyrinth structure. So when it comes to creating, let's say, a grid or some kind of structure with or without a labyrinth, and bringing stones into it, it's a blending again of the naturally occurring patterns that are found in nature and bringing in some of our own creativity and inspiration. There are different ways to do it. I'm going to show you one option. This is actually a piece of obsidian, very much like the Apache tear that you saw a little bit ago. I want to be careful with it because it is volcanic glass, and I actually have cut myself on this particular piece. So working with stones this big can be really a fabulous way to grid a garden or a yard. The reality is it's fairly impractical. These things weigh a lot, it's hard to find them. They're not always cost friendly. And I'm going to move this out of the way. And you certainly can do that. You can see how heavy that is. However, my approach is going to be a little bit more realistic within the ability that we often have when it comes to stones. So one of the first things that I would recommend is for you to consider working with clear quartz. And the reason quartz is always one of my go-to stones is that it's durable. It can handle getting wet. It's not going to get terribly scratched up. About 98% of the Earth's crust is made up of silicon dioxide, which is what clear quartz is. And so the opportunity for us to work with a stone that's going to actually have some longevity is going to be really, really great if we can work with something like quartz. So some of this goes back to one of the previous videos where I've talked about the hardness of various stones. And we've got talc on one end, all the way up to diamond on the other. Talc is 1, diamond is 10. This is going to be about 7, 7.5. So when we're looking at the hardness factor, we don't want to use a stone that's going to be particularly soft. It'll get nipped up, it'll get scratched. If it's really soft, like selenite, for example, it will get kind of mushy and dissolve over time because it's too soft to handle the water from the elements. So my suggestion would be to take a look at what might you have that you want to work with, and perhaps you want to start by simply gridding the space. You're going back to your geometry. In this case, with the garden, you get to determine what your geometry is going to be. Is it going to be a square? Is it going to be a circle? Do you have a triangle shape? Or do you have 2 triangles, one this way, one this way, and you're working with a hexagonal form? So think about what you'd like to do. And then if, let's say, you want to do a square grid, just like we worked with just a little bit ago, placing these in 4 corners, equally spaced, can be really helpful. When you're working with stones for gridding, whether it's a small grid or creating a grid within a yard or a garden, you're going to want to work with stones that have the same general size and shape. So, for example, this piece of quartz and this piece of quartz, it wouldn't work very well. I need to have 3 others like this, or 4 or 5 others, or a number of them that are similar in size so that they can have the same general mass. It could be that what you'd like to do is work with, let's say, something like this. And then also, maybe you found some wonderful stones in your yard or in your garden. And here's an example of quartz. It's got other minerals running through it as well. This is going to be really durable. So you can be quite creative. Sometimes it may be that you don't actually have a yard. You have a small container garden. Perhaps you live in a condo or an apartment. You have a small little balcony. You can create a healing garden that incorporates the plant products and the stone and crystal aspect also, and kind of do a both and. So that would be my suggestion, to consider something like that. If you're going to work with quartz and their points, I think it's great to set them up, because what these quartz then do is they direct their energy up. You end up actually creating another kind of a grid of energy that actually elevates up above as well. I know some people who will intentionally go looking for really large pieces of like black tourmaline, which I've talked about before, which is a fabulous stone, and they often will find hunks about the same size as the obsidian that I just picked up. So you can grid your house with big pieces like that. You don't have to have them that big. So you get to decide what's your budget, what's your preference, what are your thoughts, and what are your inspirations. Tucking stones in next to plants sounds like a wonderful idea, and that also can be really nurturing to particular areas that you'd like to bring in some more energy. Now, as I'm talking about this, one of the thoughts that just came to me, and I wanted to talk with you a little bit about it, is that we've talked in other videos about how to cleanse stones and how to clear stones. You don't have to worry about that if they're outside. They are getting the elemental baths from sunshine, moonshine, and from the rains that are coming down. There may, however, be a time when you maybe have another rock that you really would like to cleanse. So let's say I want to really work with this Udiolite and cleanse it really well. It's been through a lot. Maybe it's journeyed with somebody through a very tough time. And ultimately, this stone will be able to reset itself back to its original vibration, but we can support it. Actually burying stones into the earth is a really great way to do some really deep cleansing. If you do that, I would definitely suggest that you, first of all, be mindful it can tolerate moisture. Put it in a small little pot, like a terracotta pot, and then dig a hole, maybe in the same garden, and bury it, cover it up, mark it with something so you know where your Udiolite is, and let it sit there anywhere for, maybe a month, maybe through one moon cycle. Maybe you decide you want to let it sit for 3 cycles. Some people, depending on what it's been, might leave a stone for a whole year just to really allow it to rest. And so that it just came to my awareness as we were talking about gardens, that could be a way that you could really work really nicely with that too. I hope that answered that question. There's no right or wrong way to do that. And I'd say use your imagination and notice how is it that some of these ideas are coming to you and moving forward with them. It can just be really fun. So that's a great question. And so you can definitely have both a labyrinth and a grid and have a wonderful healing garden space. So we are coming up towards the end of our hour. I wanted to revisit a couple things. One is how to reach me, and there are several ways. One, you can always email me. You can give me a call. My contact information is available on my webpage and will be also available below this YouTube video once it gets posted publicly. You can send me a chat through my webpage, and if I'm online, I'll chat right back. I prefer not to get texts that are fairly detailed. I will ask that you shift into a phone call or email just because of the privacy. I like to be able to honor that a bit more. If you're interested in learning more about the courses that I offer through the Center for Crystal and Healing Studies, make sure you check the links below this video. And also, I will be posting the link to my free mini course about healing with crystal grids. And then also I'll link to my YouTube video that also talks about grids, because I'll add in the storm element one as well, because that came up during this conversation. So I am hopeful that you have found this helpful. Feel free to reach out to me. I'll be doing this again, and I have it written down. I always write it down. Next month, we will be having my next Crystal Conversations with Maryjo live Q&A on Wednesday, August 17. That's 6 p.m. Central. And so we will be still in summer in the Northern Hemisphere here, soon to be entering into a little bit different energy, but we will still be in the dog days of summer, as they say, as we shift into a change a little bit quieter as we move into the fall. So thank you so much for taking the time to send the questions in. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me for this video. And I am hopeful that if you have questions, you've had some of them answered, and always reach out to me if you have others. And I am, just as we're winding down, somebody is joining in. And so I'm going to continue this conversation. I am going to end the live stream at this time. Be well.